As educators, our instruction always begins with assessment data. We need to know who our students are. We need to know what they already know before we can plan for where they need to go. So, this module is on using assessment data to inform instructional practices. And this is really known as differentiation, how we create different options for different students in the classroom based on where they're at. We, again, need to evaluate and collect some data. So again, we have three types of evaluations: formative assessments. While you teach, you listen, observe, and record what students already know. Diagnostic assessments. Before you teach, you quantify what students already know about the topics, so you begin where they're at. And lastly, a summative assessment. After you teach, did the students understand what you were aiming to teach them? Now, data is going to inform how you teach. The instructional strategies you choose are going to depend on who your students are, what they know. Differentiation can be by content. So, what is being taught may change. So, some students might be taught content A, while other students will be taught content B. It could be the process of how we're teaching students. So, how it's being learned may be different for some students than for other students based on where they're at, what supports they need, and what inspiration. Lastly, the product. What needs to be created to evaluate what the students know? We might differentiate the product to allow some students different ways to highlight what they know or they don't know. Data also will inform how you teach. So the feedback that you provide students, the support that you give them, depends on your observations and the data that you collect. So this data might inform how you're going to reteach. So if you're teaching a lesson and you ask students some questions and they don't understand the content, you might stop and reteach. Likewise, you might give feedback to students who are struggling. You might have mini conferences with small groups or individuals, and you might help them and guide them to meet the expectation. And lastly, the next steps might be determined by what students are able and capable of doing. So you might share supplemental tasks for some students who finish early based on what they're already showing you they're able to do in a shorter time frame than other students. Now, in order to truly understand how to differentiate, you first need to establish rubric expectations. You need to know what criteria you are asking of the students. What does meeting the standard look like? So, we are going to go through an exercise where I use the rubric acronym to get you thinking about how you can establish the lessons criteria. So, step one is going to be to read the SLO. Now, when reading the SLO, you might need to begin by reviewing the curriculum. If you go to newjersey.gov/education/standards, you can see all the standards by the different disciplines from preschool up to 12th grade. So if we were looking at English language arts, and if we are to, now you can see on the right here, there's quick grade level standards. But if you scroll down, you're going to find the actual curriculum and instruction. And this is going to help you because the state has already established instructional units, prerequisite skills for each unit, and then actual SLOs within the curriculum frameworks. So for example, if we select 9th and 10th grade, we can see that based on each of the standards, there are specific learning objectives. So if you go down here, you can see many different learning objectives, and these are based on the focus standard at grade level, the previous grade level standard, and then the supporting standards are on the third column here. So what I'd like you to do is underline the keywords and verbs from these SLOs. So, if I'm teaching this ninth grade standard to accurately cite strong and thorough text evidence, I might highlight here that evidence varies in strength, relevance, and accuracy, that I can accurately cite strong and thorough text evidence. I can interpret and cite. I can support my analysis, and I can determine what the text is saying. Now, I'm also going to look at the eighth grade standards because it's important to understand how I can best understand the criteria here. So, I want to make sure that the students can make relevant connections and that they can draw inferences. Next, I'm going to brainstorm all of the skills needed for the SLO. Now, I've already started my brainstorming here by underlining and highlighting some of these specific skills that I would then want to put in my criteria. So, after looking at what I've underlined, I can see that there are 6 main skills. First, students need to know that different texts have different varied lengths and complexity. We cite evidence to prove a point. We make connections based on the evidence that we've cited. We make inferences based on the evidence cited. Next, we need to accurately cite evidence to show both an explicit and an inferential meaning. And lastly, we need to determine what the text. I'm then going to rank the skills developmentally. What do I anticipate is going to be the easiest thing for students to do? And then something that most of the class will be able to do, and then which of these skills are going to be more challenging. Going to rank the skills. The ones in blue are 8th grade standards. The ones in green will meet the 9th grade expectation, and then orange is more advanced. I want to rewrite this in a child-friendly way to ensure that all the students understand what's being asked. Now, once I have my data from the rubric or the checklist that I've created, my next step is going to be to differentiate. Now, I can differentiate the objectives. So some students might be asked to evaluate a text, while other students might be asked to list or identify. So I can have different objectives. I can tier them for different students in the classroom so that their assignments will then be slightly different, understanding the criteria I've established that I want students to developmentally grow. I can also differentiate the resources and materials that I give different students in the room. Some students might need guided notes, so a fill in as you go kind of graphic organizer. Other students might need sentence starters or a recording device. There might be different graphic organizers for the different objectives the students are focusing on. Some students might need labels or color codes. So these are just different resources that different students in the room might need. I also might create a choice board and give students the option to demonstrate their understanding through different products. So some students might be demonstrating by drawing, by having a timeline, a model, a diorama, using an art gallery. Others might be able to produce a newspaper or a song. Now, again, you would choose from this list what would best apply to your standard or your SLO, and then you would give students the option, or you might assign students different products based on their interests or the skills that they have. You can also differentiate by assessments. Some students who really struggle with writing might be asked to answer questions using a multiple choice answer. Some students might have fewer questions than others, or you might need to read the questions out loud to them. You might need to provide some students in the room with a more specific study guide. You might need to level students' reading levels so that they have a different text, even though it's the same content. So these are different options for helping students. Finally, these are a list of accommodations. So we can accommodate or we can make changes based on the following areas. We can accommodate the setting. So some students might have smaller groups or preferential seating where they might be in a quieter area or their proximity to the board might be closer. Some students might be given more time, or they might have a task broken into smaller tasks with a specific time frame. Some students might have different levels of support: a peer buddy, a teaching assistant, or guided reading or guided writing with the teacher, where they meet in a small group with the teacher and there's a little bit more support, particularly with English language learners. That might be helpful. The students might need reteaching or extra modeling. In terms of technology, there are different forms of technology that might be able to help different abilities of students in the room in terms of their reading, in terms of visual, auditory or visual needs that they might have. You could also have accommodations where, because there are students in the room who are English language learners, they might need more visual aids. I wouldn't only give the visual aids to those students. I would just make sure that my teaching strategies are more multisensory and I have more visual aids embedded throughout my activities. I might need to translate orally or writtenly in a written form in students' native language. And then some students might be able to dictate their responses. They might be able to respond verbally, or if they are nonverbal, they might have a communicator book that they could hold up to demonstrate they understand or don't understand. And then in terms of behavior modification, some students might have a specific plan or a behavior chart. For your assignment this week, I would like you to select one standard from your content area. Look up the curriculum. There should be curriculum for most of your content areas. If there's not, you might have to just use the standard and brainstorm some SLOs. Then I would like you to fill in this template with your name, the standard, and then the novice, proficient, and mastered categories. I would like you to divvy up the skills so that there's at least 2 in the novice category, 2 in the proficient, and 1 or 2 in the mastered. And then what I want you to do for the third category, labeled differentiation, is brainstorm some strategies by content, process, or product that might help the learners to move from the novice to the proficient category or from the proficient to masters. And lastly, if they've already mastered the standard, what might be the next step afterwards? And submit this on Blackboard.